Fourscore 7 years ago. Fourscore 20 years ago, I'm going to guess would be 100. Would have been much faster. And so with that, what was issued after the Battle of Antietam? What's that? Yes. Take the credit. Well done. The Emancipation Proclamation. And on January 1st, 1863, when the Emancipation Proclamation was issued, who was free?
Nobody actually.
Yes. Only the areas they controlled, but nobody. But it was such a great cause that what would it do to slavery eventually? Yeah. Once the war became about freedom, there could be no slavery. It's done. And secondly, who won into the war? And lastly, who could be recruited now? Which would be decisive for the victory of the United States, fighting for citizenship. And at Antietam, what was the general that blew opportunity after opportunity to win the war right there for the United States? And McClellan, I told you he didn't use 30,000 of his men. What was the name for that sunken road? What would they call it? Bloody Lane. And who had the bridge? The toys back there?
Burnside.
Yep, we'll take a day. Maybe they with a sub. That'd be a good thing for if I have a sub. They can play with the toys. That'd be awful. That'd be such a cool thing to do to a sub. It's toy day. Okay, so, and Emancipation, Antietam. Yes.
What are we getting over the Battle of Shiloh?
Waiting for an office reference. Very good. I think, and I'm just, don't quote me on this because I don't have, facts in front of me, but I think that was fake out. Did I just blow your mind? All right, so. No, I forgot what I was going to say. Thanks a lot. How did McClellan find the plans? Yeah, cigars. Smoke it. Okay, so with that, let's go ahead and finish up a few things, and then we'll get. I ended up telling stories, first period. So everything took about twice as long as I thought. Got it. That was come on, give me something. That was impressive. Who became the new commander of the Union Army after they finally fired McClellan? Which, by the way, we're not done with McClellan. We're never done with McClellan. I don't know if he's coming back, but he might be. Who replaced McClellan? What general?
Burnside.
And you will have a dress-up day. Should I show you the picture of Burnside again? Can you guys handle it? All right, here we go. Try not to get too emotional. What's named after him? It is pretty funny. You know what happens? Started going bald. I went bald when I was 14. Latex. But with that, I'm just warning you for some of you, it's going to happen. But you compensate by growing these really big. And dress-up day will be next Wednesday. And I will give you extra credit, a lot of it. You got to turn everything in and all that. But I will give you the opportunity. And you can dress up first off. What person can you dress up as? John C. Calhoun. And yes, people have dressed up as Burnside and tied their hair like that. Even better if you shave your head and glue the hair. It's a win-win. I've had a number of students do that. In fact, one of my former students not only did that for extra credit on that day, when I did this years ago, he is now a teacher in this very building, which is so weird having former students in this building. No. Yes. Yeah. Mr. Rayon. He shaved his head and glued it on here, and he looked pretty funny. So with that, and I believe he sat in this row. Probably this very desk, because I've had these desks for 20 years. Okay, so with that. Oh, do you dress up as Calhoun? I'll give you a few more. You can also dress up as Fluoride Calhoun.
What does he look like?
Huh? Like fluoride. You have to look her up. But the big thing about that is if you find a dress from the 19th century, something like that. And also, I thought I did this last year, and I thought it was pretty good. If you dress up like a nurse would in the Civil War, you dress up as Clara Barton, most famous nurse, and then after the war would start the American Red Cross, copying Florence Nightingale, or taking what Florence Nightingale did after the Crimean War with the International Red Cross. But nurses in the Civil War did not dress like nurses in 1900, let alone today. So you have to look into that. And did I ask somebody else? Oh, and also I last year I let some people dress up as Frederick Douglass, Student Frederick Douglass, and I thought about John Brown with the beard thing. I don't know. How many beards can we have? So you'll have a full one by tomorrow?
Yeah.
Okay. I had a friend like that, pretty much you want that. Okay, with that. And what was his nickname? We were very clever. Beard. Yes. We were so clever and witty. All right. So here's Burnside. So it'll be next Wednesday. The test is going to be on Thursday. We got to do a test before the break. And I thought about doing the dress up day on Thursday next week, and then I realized that it'd be kind of awkward trying to do the test while in costume. So the dress up day will be Wednesday. Sound good? I will give you the review list tomorrow, so Friday when you get back on. Because I'm taking some things off. I want to narrow it down because there's a lot of material. So with that, here's Burnside's army. As you can see from this easy to follow map, the situation in the east was fluid. Can you follow that at all? Let me explain it real quick. There's Washington, D.C. Richmond's down here. So like Sharpsburg and Antietam, that was right here. And Burnside, going into the winter, think about winter, Northern Virginia, it's wet, snows occasionally, weather about like now, here. You know, below freezing at night, maybe just above freezing during the day, but pretty tough to be outside all the time. But he knows, he was picked to fight, even though he didn't want the command. Burnside's bridge was actually kind of a disaster. And whose great-great-great-grandfather fought there? Me. Okay, so in a way, I was there. In fact, somewhere I have a picture of me in front of the monument. How do I know that? Yeah. Well, just kind of, just did a little research, found out, yeah. He was a partridge. Partridge all over Ohio. What?
You're the pear tree.
Why would I say that?
Your whole name.
And I've never heard that before. So, and I don't get any, I get no royalties from that song. Okay, moving on. So here, and what he decided to do was this. There's a big river here called the Rappahannock River, which Rappahannock, it's a fun word to say. Try it. Rappahannock. Say it! Rappahannock. Thank you. I stood up for you. Yes, that would be a great name for children. So if you have the twins, little Rappahannock and Frelinghuysen, where's your sister Chapultepec? Oh, outside with Ticonderoga. See? I pretty much done so much work for you. So his plan was quick march before Lee could realize it. Cross the river at Fredericksburg. Fredericksburg is where Washington and Monroe, two presidents, were born. Kind of amazing when you think about it. Cross here, get behind Lee, between Lee and Richmond, fight a battle where he wants and win the war. It's actually an okay fight, even though the winter, the roads are all mud, and it almost worked. He stole a march by a couple days on Lee, got across from Fredericksburg, the wide river. The problem was the bridges had been burnt. He's supposed to have pontoon bridges that were supposed to meet him from Washington, D.C. The pontoon bridge wouldn't arrive for 4 weeks. What's a pontoon bridge? Yeah, you have basically rafts anchored to the water. You stick boards over them, and it's a floating bridge. And they've been using these for thousands of years. Xerxes the Great of the Persian Empire actually used a pontoon bridge when he was attacking the Greeks in about 400 BC. Built a pontoon bridge over the Dardanelles between Asia and Europe, over a mile-long pontoon bridge. And that's 411 BC. The first one actually was swept away by the currents. So Xerxes had the water flogged, and the next one survived. What does flogging mean? He had 1,000 men with whips walk out into the water and whip the water to punish it for taking away his bridge. And the next one survived. The water can be intimidated. Remember that. Next time there's a flood. So with that, that's a true story. But it got here. The thing was, by the time the bridges arrived, Lee was there. There are hills overlooking Fredericksburg. He had dug in a great fortified position. It would have been suicide to attack, but Burnside really didn't know what else to do. So what did he do? He attacked. And this would be a battle that the name will have meaning down the road. Fredericksburg. They would cross the Rappahannock on the 11th of December. 11th of December, that's interesting. Today! That's the end of today's December 11th. In a way, every day is my birthday. It's a celebration when I can see all of your bright and smiling faces. For me, you mind that? Yeah, that's so much garbage. Okay, moving.
What was the guy's name again? It was Burnside.
Burnside. So they cross the river, and these are watercolors shown using the rafts for the pontoon to cross over. They shelled Fredericksburg and it caught fire. You can see them constructing the pontoon bridge. And they would take the town on the 12th. These are actually Union soldiers in Fredericksburg on the 12th. You can see the long blue wool cloaks they wore. Pretty warm. Not better equipped than the Confederates, who were just wearing whatever they could grab. But the problem was the Confederates were entrenched on these heights. The trenches are still there, part of the national park. They were there for about 5 months. And Burnside's plan was to attack the strongest part of the Confederate line with about 70,000 men. A diversionary attack would be down here. And the problem here is not only is it got hill that go out like this with Confederate guns, just could rain shells down on the Union Army. There's another one of those sunken road, remember from Antietam? And then that sunken road had a Stonewall. This is a few months later, but that's what this looked like. It's still there. If you go there today, it looks like that. The Confederates abandoned that, so they left some weapons and various things. And there was a mile of clearing, no trees, and almost completely flat, but gradually going up to that stone wall. So for a mile, Burnside's plan was to march his men in lines up that hill. Can you imagine what's going to happen to them when they march up that hill? But he didn't know what else to do, and that's what he decided. So they're going to line up and march and just hoping to someday overwhelm the Confederates. And I'm not going to worry about that picture. Let's get to right here. So this is a watercolor looking down at the Confederate lines. You can see they can't miss a shot. Here are Union forces marching up the hill. And the thing was, you notice that they're leaning forward, the bullets whizzed by them. It said that it reminded them like they're going into a rainstorm. And just instinctually, all the Union soldiers kind of leaned forward, like going into a driving rain. But it was bullets going by their face. And this is a picture that's actually at the battlefield. I have the smaller version I bought there, over here. But here's the stone wall, still there, this long clearing. And they marched in lines and went up that hill. If you go there today, the town is about here now. So the national park maybe has a quarter of that clearing. But even there, you stand by that stone wall and look down, and it's like, this is suicide. And in a way it was. At a mile, Confederate guns started shooting solid shot. Remember solid cannonballs? We know what they can do to the legs of, let's say, Spanish dictators. We also had exploding shells, but gunpowder doesn't really explode, so that didn't do a lot of damage, but still, they couldn't miss. Could not miss. And then when they got to about 500 yards, right here, what happened? What's that weapon with the canister, and just mowed men down. Soon their long lines as they marched, big clumps of men would disappear, and there'd be heaps of dead and dying men screaming. It's just this hell as men marched up the hill. And then at 100 yards, 20,000 Confederates opened fire at once. One volley, and men just went down in a heap. They got to about 40 yards and they couldn't go any further. Men started falling down. This kind of shows where they began to fall down. A few got to within 20 yards. But when they hit the ground, what's their shelter? Because it's just flat. Dead and dying bodies. They huddled behind them. The musket balls would hit the bodies, and they were there all day. Short day because it's winter, but cold and miserable and just laying flat, hoping shells don't hit them. Next man, another wave would come past. There's stories about wounded men reaching out to men going past, trying to stop them. It's suicide. You'll be killed. They get a little bit further and stopped. The Confederates started chanting and mocking them, and it was a bloodbath. The third big wave, starting back here, Burnside, knowing that it's a disaster, but he didn't know what else to do, ordered another charge, and he was going to personally lead it by horseback. Can you imagine what a target you'd be on a horse? Every gun on that line would shoot at him. His staff pulled him down, so the commanding officer can't do that. He was not a good commander, but he did not lack in courage. And it'd be another slaughter. This battle was a nightmare. Ironically, remember I told you about the diversion, which happened, it would have been over here on this picture? That broke through the Confederate line. But it's a diversion. There's no one there to exploit the breakthrough. Hell, there were heaps of bodies out in front of the Confederate lines and wounded men, but they couldn't get there because they're going to be shot. At night, men came out to try to bring them water and help bring them back. And even a more macabre scene was seen the next morning. Think about the Confederates. I told you about their equipment. In the morning, all these Union dead out there, naked. Confederates snuck out and stole their clothes and their coats, and their shoes especially, because they were freezing. So you have this weird scene of all these Confederate forces in blue overcoats. I guess I don't blame them, but what hell on earth. After this battle, all you had to say was Fredericksburg, and everybody knew. And Union soldiers would shake in terror. Confederates too, because they saw the slaughter that happened. And for the rest of the war, they talked about Fredericksburg. And everybody wanted their own Fredericksburg. They wanted to be the side behind defenses. They all talked about Fredericksburg.
How many people died?
At this battle, there's going to be over 18,000 casualties. So about 2,000 died. Casualties killed, wounded, and missing. This is one of the bloodiest battles, but almost all the 18,000 were one side. A horrible disaster. Burnside will be forever, his name be associated with Fredericksburg. Part of the reason why they said that the Burnside, when he was really popular, turned into sideburns, is he can't do anything right or keep anything straight, so they started flip-flopping it. I don't know if that's true or not, but why not? And remember I told you about the Irish Brigade that was newly destroyed at Antietam? It was decimated here. Marr, who helped recruit these men, couldn't take it. And he was done, couldn't fight anymore. He already threw his life for what happened to him. He had a little bit of a drinking problem, probably got worse. But he was still a very important person. He was a leading Democrat who was for the Union, and Lincoln knew how valuable that was. So they tried to find a different post for him, but eventually, for reasons that are never really clear, they made him the assistant to the territorial governor of a brand new territory after this battle. What brand new territory? Montana. That territorial governor, literally, Marr arrived and he quit. So Marr's the governor. And he would spend his entire time as governor battling against pro-Confederacy vigilantes who were fighting against the Union. And they almost certainly murdered him. Almost certainly. So that's how the connection with Marr to Montana and our capital, you know, the great, it is a, okay, I like statue, but a great statue. So with that, before we get to the right down the western theater, the thing about it is that they went to the gates of Richmond. It looked like the war was almost over. Then we had these horrific defeats. How many defeats in a row, really? 7 days, Bull Run, Antietam, which is barely a victory for the Union, and then this horrible defeat. It looks like the war's never going to end. And now the war is wider. We have a whole new country after this war. But we didn't even talk about the West, which I got to do really quick. The West in 1862, all kinds of stuff would happen too that would be dramatic. But unlike the East, there are rivers which are like highways into the East, and both sides, especially the North, had steamboats, and they put iron armor, remember, ironclads. Confederates had few. This is the Indianola against the Mississippi. Yeah.
When you said theater, you mean like setting, like what kind of?
Yeah.
Okay.
In military, they call where the area is where the fighting is in theater.
Okay.
So like in World War II, when they fought in Italy, it was the Italian theater.
Oh.
Sometimes they might call it the European theater of operation. It just depends.
Okay.
So with that, these are the rivers. Wide rivers that big boats can use. Obviously, we know the biggie, right? The Mississippi. The Tennessee went like a highway through the center of western Tennessee, and then the Cumberland through the north. So the Confederates tried to build forts on these rivers to hold them. And the Union, if they could take these forts, would change everything. Pope, remember him from the Second Bull Run? He led a taking of a fort here, out of number 10. But then the two biggies are over here. But not only that, there's blockade duty. And the Union Navy responsible for blockading New Orleans would pull off one of the greatest coups in the war. So just as McClellan is beginning the Peninsular Campaign, New Orleans would be attacked by the U.S. Navy under Admiral David Farragut. Now it's 100 miles of river up the Mississippi River because it meanders so much from the ocean to New Orleans. But Farragut, I like this picture. He was a Virginia man, stayed loyal to the country, and there was a problem with the silver oxide. So you have these kind of weird lines. I just think that's a cool picture. Farragut, ocean-going vessels, wooden steamboats. He had his men take the anchors and wrap the chains around the hull for a little bit of armor, and then waited to a new moon. You know what I mean by new moon? No moon. By the way, did anyone see the full moon last night? It was really a pretty bright moon. Well, wait till dark and chug past two forts that the U.S. Army built before the war. And there's just two forts right down here. You can drive down and look at them. Problem is the bayous disappearing. Combination of global warming and dredging out the Mississippi is actually an environmental catastrophe in Louisiana. It's all disappearing this way. And it's a disaster in the making. I drove down there 8 years ago, and one of the forts is gone. The other fort was flooded by Hurricane Katrina, and it's like it has a cement or a brick wall, and it's like a swimming pool. It's now slowly eroding, and the water will never drain, which is sad. But the plan was to go in the middle of the night and chug past them, and they made it. They made it past the fort, surprising everybody. The Confederates thought nobody would get past the fort, so they never defended New Orleans. So they chugged upriver, and the next thing you know, here are Union gunboats, Union ocean-going vessels off of New Orleans. And if you've ever been to New Orleans, it is the French Quarter, which is the old part of the town, is just barely above sea level. In fact, there's a big dike along the river to keep the river out. And the rest of the town is below sea level. So it's a really interesting place. But the other thing about New Orleans is, has anyone been to New Orleans? It's really cool when you go into New Orleans, you're in the French Quarter, and the dike is above you. So it looks like boats are above you. I was there, and they had a big cruise ship there. They went up the Mississippi and would stop there. And those cruise ships are these big, massive, top-heavy things. Anyone been on a cruise boat or seen a cruise ship? And it felt like I was under the ship. It was creepy. So they're like looking over the city. They told the mayor of New Orleans, "We'll burn the town down unless you surrender." And what happened? New Orleans surrendered without a fight. The biggest, most important commercial city in the South was captured by the United States without firing a shot. By the way, how do you burn a town from an ocean-going vessel in 1862? They take the cannonballs, put them in an oven, make them red hot. They get somebody with really strong hands to pull them out, or tongs, put them in the cannon, and that would set fire to wooden buildings. Good idea. That's how they did. Obviously, you don't want to do that too much, because if you drop the cannonball on the ship, it can set the ship on fire. Once again, that will crew morale. So all of southern New Orleans, all the way up past Baton Rouge, southern Louisiana, was in Union hands for the end of the war. Remember the Emancipation Proclamation? It didn't free slaves there. So it looked like the U.S. was winning. And then in the north, another couple big victories along the Tennessee River. Ulysses S. Grant was actually fired, but then they needed generals, and he was brought back to take Fort. I'll get to the forts in just a second. Quick thing about Grant. Pictures of generals were a big deal in the war. Both sides would have make almost shrines. People would make them in their homes, shrines to generals, which seems a little weird, but that's actually kind of happened even in World War II. Harper's Magazine would do these sketches of them, put them in their magazine. Nobody knows who that is. But for a year and a half, everyone thought that was Grant. I just think that's kind of funny. Why? Because the first picture of Grant, he has this really long beard, which he hated. He saw this picture and thought he looked like a pirate, and would never be allowed to be seen without a trimmed beard. But Grant would be in command, and that was the style. You tie it one side, sometimes they tie it both sides. That's not his real name. His real name was Hiram Ulysses Grant. But when he went to West Point, the person transcribing the names down either didn't hear it right or didn't really listen and wrote down Ulysses S. Grant instead of Hiram Ulysses. Now, he actually never liked his name, so he let it go. But there's another reason he did it. Every West Point cadet has a chest, a wooden chest where they put all their gear in. They must keep it organized. They inspect it, and they would carve in the initials for your first, middle, and last name. And he liked U.S. for the United States, USG. He thought that looked good. Because what would his initials been if it had his real name? Hug. And he didn't want Hug, so he decided to go with that. So, this is just an S. The United States has 2 presidents in its history, 2 of them, that their middle name is nothing but the letter S. Ulysses S. Grant and Harry S. Truman. The S stands for S. Everyone called him Sam. Okay, moving on. He fought with accommodation in the Mexican War. After the war, he'd be on remote forts out in the West, bored, and did not do well, and was kind of got the reputation, somewhat deservedly, of being a drunk. Okay, he was clearly an alcoholic, but not what you might think of. I mean, you think of an alcoholic, you might think of someone who drinks all the time. He didn't have that issue. He could go a long time, especially either if he was with his wife, had a very good marriage, or doing something. He could go weeks, months without drinking. But once he started drinking, especially whiskey, he could literally drink straight without sleep for 5 or 6 days and just lose complete control. They called it going on a bender. And he could do that. And that's where he had this reputation when he got bored. So he had the reputation, he's a drunk, he'll fail. But they had nobody else. He's responsible to take these 2 forts on the Tennessee and the Cumberland. They're right next to each other. This is actually a national park, a park between the lakes. Fort Henry on the Tennessee and Fort Donaldson. This was a style all the way through the rest of the century to draw pictures like you're looking down, like a bird's eye view. You ever seen those pictures like at Helena of these? I have one of Helena in like 1890 of this kind of looking down at it, a pencil drawing. There's one if you go, a couple places that, a couple restaurants have these from the old style. Well, using the new Navy and chug up the river up to Tennessee, when they got to Fort Henry, which was here, it flooded in the spring runoff. And the Grant captured Fort Henry without firing a shot. He's all of a sudden a hero. Then what did he have to do? Cross over here, and Fort Donaldson was over here. The problem with Donaldson was this. It's on a hill. It's a better fortification. Here's a watercolor of them trying to storm the fort, and they were repulsed. But what do you call it when you surround an enemy position and starve them out? Someone said what? Do you remember that term? It's called siege. They laid siege to it. And the Confederates couldn't get out. They didn't have many men in the fort. Now, the commander who knew Grant from the old army assumed Grant would give him. Remember I mentioned how a lot of times a battle would end and one side would surrender, but they would surrender with conditions or terms. We agree to quit fighting. You win. Our survivors will stack our weapons. We keep our weapons and we'll go home. But you win. No one else has to die. He assumed his old friend would give him very good conditions. Grant not only refused to see the commander, a general by the name of Buckner, but Grant demanded, and you have to get this down, Unconditional surrender. Unconditional surrender. You will surrender, and then I will decide what happens to the prisoners, which he would exchange them for Union prisoners. But unconditional surrender. And that had the feeling that here's a tough fighter. And Grant would use that. First off, think about his initials. U.S. Grant, unconditional surrender Grant. And that implied he was a fighter. Because remember how cautious McClellan was and wouldn't fight? And here's somebody who will fight. So Grant's reputation will be, his detractors would say he's a drunken, kind of a bumbling fool, or here's the man we need who will finish the war. Unconditional surrender will have big connotations in a little thing called World War II. Yes?
Is that Cumberland River?
That's Cumberland River, yeah. Once that happened, you see how the Tennessee goes right through the state? Union gunboats can go down the Tennessee and up the Cumberland, and every Confederate position here is now outflanked. So what did the Confederates do that spring? They evacuated all of Western Tennessee. So think about the situation going into the spring of 1862. McClellan's marching on Richmond. New Orleans had just fallen, and now Western Tennessee is liberated. Looks like the war's over, doesn't it? In fact, Grant's army got complacent. They leisurely marched down here, waiting for the water to go down. And they would camp, they quit putting out pickets, which are sentries. They wouldn't dig in case of surprise attack. I mean, they assumed it was over. In fact, Grant got bored, meaning the potential for a bender. That's what he's going to be accused of. But the Confederates weren't done. The Confederates rallied every soldier they had in northern Mississippi, and they're going to counterattack. They're going to counterattack under a general named Albert Sidney Johnston. You won't need to know him. But the battle is Shiloh. April 6th and 7th of 1862. During the Peninsula Campaign, New Orleans had just fallen. It's on the Tennessee River. Big, wide river. Really rugged. Lots of little creeks, the biggest being Shiloh Creek. And there's a little, nothing more than a pier called Pittsburgh Landing. So sometimes you see it called the Battle of Pittsburgh Landing, but everybody calls it Shiloh. Lots of forest, a rugged area. And the Confederates marched all night. And just at sunup, while the Union soldiers in their camps here, thinking they're perfectly safe, were sitting around campfires, cooking their breakfast. Remember I told you what they ate? Salt pork and cornmeal. Oh, and crackers. I forgot to talk about hardtack. You know what hardtack is?
No.
I'll let you look at a piece in a few days. Hardtack are basically really hard crackers that you can carry anywhere. I mean, like literally hard, like teeth are overrated hard. But they're cooking breakfast, and then all of a sudden, out of the forest come the various forest fauna. Deer, rabbit, and land walleye come running by them. Why? 40,000 Confederates are pushing all those animals through them. And then all of a sudden the Confederates come screaming out of the wood and took the Union by surprise. Men ran away. It was a disaster. Fortunately, the Confederates their lines were all messed up because of the night march, and a lot of them were starving. So hungry after 24 hours straight marching, what did a lot of them do? Yeah, they stopped and ate the breakfast that the Union soldiers were cooking. And so that allowed time for a few isolated pockets of Union forces to hold out. Most famously, a place called the Hornet's Nest. Bullets whiz by and sound like hornets to them. And this is a picture from the Union point of view of the Hornet's Nest. And that allowed Grant, the story was, the rumor was Grant was drunk and sleeping off a bender. We actually don't know if it's true, but it could be. His staff was very protective about what happened, on information. But they were able to rally him, and then the Confederate commander was mortally wounded, Johnston. And when that happened, the Confederate attack began to break down, and it was a close run thing. The Confederates just about won their huge victory. But the Union barely held, and the next day, they pushed the Confederates off the battlefield. Technically, it's a Union victory, right? But just barely. For the rest of the war, through today, this is the battle that many Southerners look at it as like, we almost won here. We almost won. This was the place we could have. This was the what-if battle. And after the war, those who were sympathetic to the Confederacy start calling themselves, or they start believing what's called the lost cause. And they also call themselves dead-enders. You know, we continue to fight. Shiloh would become their symbol. To this day, the symbol of the South is Shiloh Battlefield, which is a really great place to go if you get a chance. And I'll come back and tell you one story about that in a few minutes. But Grant's going to be blamed for just barely winning. But I should add, there were just under 90,000 soldiers who fought there, slightly more Union. 1 out of every 4 men who fought there were killed, wounded, or missing. As a percentage of people killed, this is one of the bloodiest battles in American history. This war is just horrific. And remember, this is pre-high explosives. There's no dynamite. There's no machine guns. There's no high-powered artillery. This is slaughter. Henry Halleck was the commander of Union forces in the West. He never liked Grant. And so he used this as an excuse to fire Grant from combat command by promoting him. You get what I mean? He promoted him to his second in command. What does the second in command do? Nothing. So he moved him up. Now this might have implications. Halleck was just as cautious as McClellan. Do you remember who, he was a protege of Old Fuss and Feathers. Who was Old Fuss and Feathers? What general? Do you remember? Scott. They called him Old Brains. Old Brains. And for the next, all summer, they kind of messed around northern Mississippi and not much happened. But then, after Antietam, Halleck was called back to Washington, D.C. Lincoln realized we need a commander. And Halleck would command the entire U.S. Army. He's one of the most important Americans in this era that almost no one knows about. Has anyone ever heard the name Halleck? He's mentioned once in your book. And I can understand why if you've read about it, but I can see why you would miss that word. Which is, you know, the way it is. Really cautious, but in some areas he did very well. So now it's Grant in command. And Grant's goal now is, his main army is up here. There's another army here, but we're not going to talk about that now. Vicksburg. Vicksburg, Mississippi is a fortress city along the Mississippi River. And as long as the Confederates hold that, they control the Mississippi. Union forces are down here, and they're up here. But this fortification, and it's an incredible fortified city. It's on high bluffs overlooking the river, really rugged terrain here, and then the best part, here it's called the Yazoo Delta, which is this marshy region along the Yazoo River. It's impossible to attack this way. Oh, and what's over here? What do you call swamps in Louisiana? Bayous. It's almost impossible to attack. It's a great fortified city. And Grant is now into the fall of 1862 as Antietam is just happening. He's got to figure out a way to get here. His first plan is to go through Mississippi. Take Jackson, cut it off. The problem is, as he advances this way, his supply line along the railroads gets longer and longer. What Confederate unit can sweep behind his lines and cut off his supply line? Not Lee. What did you say? Yeah, Lee's still, he's in Northern Virginia. Cavalry. Cavalry could sweep behind on horseback and cut off his supply line. And this would be the beginning of a cavalry commander who would have the best reputation for fighting and be one of the most horrible people in American history. Not saying a lot. Nathan Bedford Forrest. The slave trader who first recruited his regiment, saying, if you can ride a horse and want to kill Yankees, join my regiment. He would beat off units that were 2, 3, 4 times his size. Beat them off, cut off the supply lines, burn bridges, burn supply depots. There are other commanders, but he would have the most powerful reputation. And Grant couldn't advance overland. He stopped that attack with just a few hundred men. Grant's attack of 40,000 men. For the rest of the war, all you had to say is Forrest is coming, and Union soldiers would be in the shade. He was that terrifying. And he was a truly horrible man. After the war, he would be the first grand wizard of a terrorist organization called the Ku Klux Klan. So we'll come back to Forrest. So with that, they tried a number of other things. But here's Vicksburg. This is after the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers back after 1863. The Mississippi River came like this and then turned almost due north and then turned due south. And that's Vicksburg. High cliffs, really rugged, so it's hard to attack. Up here is all swamps and more heights. It's a perfect fortified place, 50 feet above the ocean, the heights are. So any ship, especially when they have to come to almost a full stop to make that turn, guns can plunge down. It's an incredible fortified position. They tried to attack up here, they tried to go through the bayous, they tried everything. All through the winter into 1863, they tried everything, including digging a canal right here, hoping the river will wash out a deeper channel and go around it. They actually dug some 8,000 men dug with shovels. But what do you suppose is going to happen in the sandy soil of a very wet winter? Shovel, go up, and what happens? What happens to the dirt when you shovel wet soil? Right back down. 8,000 men dug a little bit over a quarter mile, and they ran called the quits. It's still there. The river has moved, so now there's a straight 20-foot wide, quarter-mile long, just lake, straight as an arrow, with water the color of root beer. And I had to go look at it. You go into Louisiana, you go this really ugly part across the river from Vicksburg, and there it is, just this thing. And when I went there, there's a little kid on the shore fishing for carp. And I said, "How are you doing?" He goes, "Doing good, using corn." Just never forget that. That just stuck in my head.
Where's Vicksburg on the map?
Right here. See these kind of this grid pattern? Those
Okay, yeah.
And right about here is a really good barbecue restaurant. Okay, so with that, Grant, going into the spring of 1863, rolled the die and tried an incredibly risky operation. He would, that doesn't work, yes.
Was Vicksburg considered like a siege? Maybe that?
Not quite yet. We're coming to it, because it will be a siege. When the spring runoffs began to die down at the end of March, he marched, basically cutting off from his supplies, that to carry 3 days worth of food. Marched 40,000 men here while faking attack up here. Waited down here and then had his ships, had the Navy. They didn't turn their steam engines on, or they didn't turn them on. They didn't have the fire going. So they're going to drift. Over 30 ships would drift in a new moon when it's dark, try to drift past the Vicksburg guns at night. The Vicksburg, they realized it, had set up big bonfires when they're halfway through. 3 ships were sunk, but they made it past. And once they made it past, they buried Grant's men over at Bruinsburg. And instead of attacking straight here, Grant marched here, burnt down basically destroyed the city of Jackson so that no one could attack his rear, then turned and pushed all Confederate forces towards Vicksburg. It was a brilliant move. He's cut off from the supply line, so where did they get food? They liberated it from southern farms. Liberated. You know what I mean by liberating. So with that, and then they tried to take Vicksburg by storm. It was a disaster. And so with guns blazing away from naval boats, they began the siege of Vicksburg to starve them out. May through June. And this became the focal point of the whole war. While that's going on, in 1863, the Union Army will have a new commander. Burnside's going to be cashier. And do write this down. It's, of course, Fighting Joe Hooker. And no, they are not named after him. I always get some student want to ask that. No. But when I was at Shiloh, this was a while ago, so it's going to be close to 15 years ago. My wife and I went on spring break. We went down to New Orleans and then drove up to Memphis. Really fun trip. But think about spring break. That was the anniversary of the Battle of Shiloh. We wanted to go there and thought, well, let's time it. Because they had this huge celebration at Shiloh, a commemoration for the battle. And there were over 10,000 reenactors that outside the battlefield reenacted the battle. And there were over 15,000 people went to this. I mean, people were all over. They had buses bringing in people because they couldn't park in the battlefield. And they have a parking lot there for the visitor center that was open, so they have stands for people to, like vendors and all kinds of things. So we went. It was amazing. And they had a hospital set up, looked like a Civil War hospital to get an idea what happened there. They did test firing of cannon. And has anyone ever heard of black powder musket fire? It is so much louder than smokeless powder. Well, a cannon was the loudest thing I've ever heard. And I was coming out to take it. I thought, this would be a good picture. And it fired when I wasn't ready. And not only did it knock me down, I've never quite heard how to get out of my left ear. Loudest thing I've ever heard in my life. That's why men in artillery talk like this. Okay, but next. So we're there. And they had this little band. They were playing Civil War music. They had a couple, like a guitar and a fiddle and a squeeze box, which is like a small accordion. And they're playing songs from the Civil War. And there were like 1,000 people in this parking lot listening to them. And it was neat. You know, it was a beautiful day. Everyone's in t-shirts and things like that. And so my wife and I are standing there. And I didn't notice things. And we've been from New Orleans up to Memphis. And we're in the South. We're in the part of the United States that is shockingly more cosmopolitan than Helena. And it's the first time I noticed something. Everybody there was white. No place else in the South was like that. It was, which I'm very comforted by this cross-section of people all over. That's one of the great things about America. There, it's like noticeable. And then the band started playing. And the band got done with the song, and the leader of it in the microphone said, "Okay, we're here to commemorate one of the great battles of the Civil War." And the whole place started to boo. Boo. What? And then he said, "No, I mean the war between the states." And people started to applaud. Yeah. And then he said, "No, I mean the war of northern aggression." People were like, "Yeah." And they said, "No, I mean the war of northern arrogance." And they started hugging in front of us, and they're high-fiving and cheering. And looking around, that's the first time I noticed, and you really saw it because it's concentrated. You're in this big crowd of people. Almost all the people had shirts with like Confederate battle flags on it, pictures of Lee and Davis. The people right in front of us, the guy in front of me had a shirt that had Jefferson Davis, Stonewall Jackson, and Robert E. Lee, and it said on the bottom, "We have not forgotten." And it was all over. I mean, it's just, and so I was looking at this happened, they're cheering. And my wife kind of tugged at my shoulder and whispered to me, "We're the enemy here." Yeah, I got all of a sudden very uncomfortable. And so we both kind of turned around to walk away. And the thing was, my wife got a little bit ahead of me. And you ever get this feeling like someone's like looking at you? And so I'm like going like this, and I turned around, and all of a sudden there's these three guys right in front of me. And both all about this tall. Let me finish the story. It'll take a second. And the guy's looking at me. And the guy looks at me and goes, "You a Yankee?" What? And the thing was, I wear these shirts that are like old football and baseball teams, like the old. And one of them, well, I wore the old. It's an NFL team that's in Arizona now, the Cardinals, but it used to be St. Louis. Before that, I had a shirt that said Chicago Cardinals. A northern town from 1951. Huh? You're in a rental. But let me finish. So I said, I kind of laughed, and he's getting mad, and they're all just glaring at me. And he goes, "Are you a Yankee?" And I just go, "I'm from Montana." And I can tell he had no idea where Montana. And so he goes, "No, are you a Yankee?" And I said, Montana wasn't a state yet. And I could just see like his head just going. And this is his last, he looks at me and goes, and walked away. That's when I realized for many people, the war is still going on.
Probably like, wait, John one day.
Why?
I'm having it's good. I'll be back Tuesday though. It's like 10.
Oh, that's good. Oh, really?
It's a cyclops lesion, which is why like a year and a half out I can still really miss squad.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah.
Oh, thanks, you're a good man. I'm not exactly sure, but I got to do a lot of chapters.
Say, you need to
Friday,
I
I'll.
know, I can feel confident. Like straight up.
Here's the thing, today I have 6 on it.
Right, yeah. Yeah, no, I don't have some.
Watch the very beginning. The very.
Okay.
Thank you, did you like it? Yeah, yeah.
So, this,
Did everyone get the Place It on Lucky Dan reference? You didn't watch the movie? Anyone get that?
yeah, I got it.
What's the Place It on Lucky Dan?
No, from the stick.
Huh?
From the stick.
What did it mean?
Oh, no, like, it was supposed to be like, place the bet on Lucky Dan.
That's what Lonigan thought, yeah.
And then it was like, place it in second place.
Yeah, because you can bet on win, place, or show. What is show? Third place. It was a way to fool Lonigan so he would lose his money. Yep. Place it on Lucky Dan.
That's what I didn't get.
Because the first time was, or not that much money. It was to make sure he knew.
Wait.
They fooled him.
So they told me to place it on the lucky day.
They fooled him.
So
What happened is that's why they had him run him out. And when he left, what did it look like after Kelly and that makes sense. So you have to do it so they don't know. They don't know they've been caught. So you get away with these. So he assumed the FBI did it, and since he's doing all kinds of illegal activity, he doesn't want to get messed up with the FBI. So they knew they could get him away. Not,
I get it.
yes.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go and take out the list. Yes. What? What's that? Yeah, just paper looked like dollar bills and they were putting real money on top, yeah. Why? Yeah, so that it stacks of money that if you're at the window, you can see them. So the one that wanted to get is stacks of cash. So he thinks that they are loaded with money. And they got to make it look like a legitimate operation. But then they also got to make sure that Lonigan goes away. And at least for a while, won't chase him so they can make their escape. That's why they set up the murder. Oh, and also the guy from the Bunko Squad. Remember him? Snyder. They wanted Snyder to quit looking too. Perfect way to have Snyder take away Lonigan. Let's take out your list. I will give you a few minutes if you want to talk it over. And then we will go into the mighty randomizer. And when one of the people in your team is picked, then you choose for both of them. No. Oh, everybody. I mean, whichever person was picked, you picked again. And wait a second. So, if you're doing a newspaper article, each of you have to pick a different one. And you put them both on there. So you got to finesse the newspaper in some way to get them both in. Al Capone, and this one you have to be a competition for. Al Capone's big enough that you can do him alone, or two people can do Al Capone. But then, oh yeah, there's a bunch of connectors, and so everything from Murder Inc. Mickey Cohen and Meyer Lansky, Lucky Luciani are all connected. Legs Diamond, Dutch Schultz are connected to Murder Inc. Sam Giancano and the Gambino family are linked in that era. Eastman and 5 Points Gang would be linked. Oh, Bugsy Siegel started in Las Vegas. And so let me add one more. If you wanted two people to do Bugsy Siegel, if you want to do Bugsy Siegel, and one of the great mob stories in history, and then combine that with early Las Vegas.
Yeah.
And then on the other one, the gangsters, these are all more individual gangs or just a gang of a few people, not really organized crime. Like Pretty Boy Floyd, Babyface Nelson, those one you have to separate. Let me give one more. The Black Sox scandal, which happened right in the beginning, so it kind of fits into that. That one connects directly to Arthur Rothstein. Black Sox connects directly to Arthur Rothstein. Arnold. Did I say Arthur? Arnold. Yes.
So, okay, I'm just a little confused here. So we're doing the newspaper instead of like a document.
Yes.
Okay.
Your newspaper instead of that.
Gotcha.
And so you have to do the newspaper and basically set up like come up with your own front page or title of it. You have to, so you're making basically a front page of a newspaper. So you got two main articles, some kind of article, at least something about the current events at that time, approximate time around, you have to come up with a date for your newspaper. And it's got to be after the events for obvious reasons. And then you need you need ad, and then, something else like that. Maybe, I know on the front page, but maybe I have something in sports matter or something like that. Yes, so.
So Married to the Mob and Mouse, is that just like various women that you get to pick?
Yeah, and then there's a lot of different women who, they weren't directly part of the gang, but since they were almost always there, so there's some really famous, they're called malls, yeah. Yeah.
What if you just want to do the Black Sox thing instead?
You can just do that one, but if you skip with somebody else, if you want to do Black Sox, they do our Rothstein, which is a great story. Rothstein was one of the most famous Boston gangsters. Just he was infamous for everything from running numbers, bookmaking, brutal murder. His story about how he died is a great story. So, okay, I'll give you a few minutes. Want to make sure you got teams?
I could.
What do you like? They don't have to fit directly together, but you got to figure out a way to finesse. You have to figure out a way to finesse. Yes. I know it's great.
Yeah, I know, that's why I'm not trying to. I'm gonna call
That's what happened, but then you gotta do the paper and you do an abbreviated version of the paper. It's a lot easier to organize. Oh, I should add this. Look at the top two on there, they're pretty good ones. The La Cosa Nostra, that's the mafia. That's the mafia. And the Black Hand were an immigrant gangster group, another good story. But La Cosa Nostra, that's the Sicilian mafia. Well, then they came to the US.
Okay.
Which other question? Then you add it second. Make sure. You just make a meeting. You say, yeah. The Black Hand's pretty complicated because it would be simple. So there are a lot of groups. Because it kind of looks scary, Yeah, you do like, say, 3 arrows. And a lot of them, they're not quite as.
Believe me, I've seen 3 seasons.
I was busy. Some of us work for a living.
No, we have 7 days left of one more one.
I had to talk to him. I didn't quite finish my story. Don't flare. Trust me, I'll make you all nimble many times. Oh,
I feel like you told us that you were gonna tell us stories and you never did.
Yeah, I
Like, your eyes feel like
It's not-
it's not always.
yeah, that's what a good performance. I think he's like, oh, I gotta come back here. But you all keep coming back open, there'll be some reason. Well, part of the problem is I forget them. I forget what I said. I've been doing this for a long time. Oh, this is still being recorded.
Boogers. I hate to say it.
All right.
Oh my goodness.
I wouldn't know what to say.
Yeah,
Sorry.
Oh!